Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Was the Blue Uchiha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Wild boar, Itachi asked incredulously, as he looked down at his uncle, who was on one knee before him and attaching one of his forearm launchers to the young Uchiha's right forearm, first wrapping some bandages on the boy's arm, a single black, cotton hand glove and then fastening the leather straps of his mid to short range launcher. We're hunting wild boar. Blue nodded his head. Yup. Never killed a boar before. The boy teetered from the side to side, not sure if how he should respond. He then said, I've killed a rabbit before. A rabbit? The older Uchiha asked, pausing in what he was doing and peering up at the black-eyed child with his sky-blue orbs. Like one rabbit. The boy bobbed his head, self-conscious at the mildly astonished way the man had spoken, and at how Orochimaru, standing some feet behind her son and watching him attach the launcher to Itachi's forearm, hissed laughingly. The man went back to what he was doing, tinkering briefly with the right launcher. Huh. By Itachi's age, Blue had already killed his first person, a Kumo shinobi that had kidnapped his crush, Kushina Uzumaki. He didn't want to make it a standard for his nephew to abide by. If the boy hadn't taken his first human life yet, all the better. Not bad, for a kid. The 7-year-old found a proud smirk flick up his face. I know. Orochimaru, knowing better, wisely didn't make any comments on the matter. We'll be hunting for 2, maybe 3 boars. I'll be using crystalline to bring 'em down and you'll get up close and finish 'em off if they haven't died using this. He handed the boy a tanto from inside a storage seal in his backpack. What am I using this for then? Motioning to the forearm launcher but reluctant to actually touch it, else it might go off or some other unpredictable thing. He had tried using his one tomo dojutsu to analyze the device his uncle had invented, but what he had seen beneath the metal and plastic body were complicated connections that made his eyes turn. Foxes in this part of grass country tend to come in and try to steal kills if you're not fast enough to snag it. He tapped the launcher with his pointer finger, once, and there were a series of clicks and snaps from within the device, some of which startled the wide-eyed child. Now listen carefully. He then ran down a quick explanation of what his launcher was, not how it functioned, for even though Itachi was a prodigy, the Blue Uchiha didn't think his nephew was ready to hear how his forearm inventions worked. His short to mid-range launcher, for Itachi, encompassed the whole forearm. It had 4 prominent nozzles protruded forward, the 2 in the middle were half a centimeter longer than the 2 outer ones, and those 2 in the middle were aptly named primary nozzles while the outer ones were called just that, outer nozzles. The primary nozzles were where Blue's senbon shot out of at high speeds and deadly impact. The outer nozzles were for other purposes, which Naruto didn't speak of. The man turned the younger Uchiha's arm over, showing his inner wrist, pointing at a slot within some leather straps and saying, This is where you reload. This launcher only allows 6 needles at a time and the firing rate is 0.2 seconds. He looked up from his creation, raising an eyebrow. Do you understand that? Yes. The launcher shoots fast. Exactly. Like crystalline, the short to mid-range launcher made maximum use of air pressure and short spurts of heat before blasting the needles to propel them, increasing the distance and ensuring that the speed was sustained for as long as possible, so that once it reached its target it wouldn't simply bounce off them. But unlike crystalline, they didn't have a piston. The longer range weapon had the air pressure and a powerful piston that was kicked from behind by a burst of heat, propelling his needles further and faster. That single thing, Blue's self-made piston, differentiated the range and use of his launchers. There was no logical way to add a piston to his forearm launchers without making them overly bulky, and he wasn't too keen on adding more weight to his short to mid-range launchers, for the combined weight was less than a fifth of crystalline's. The last thing he showed the boy was a sleight of hand trick to quickly reload the launcher. An easy maneuver of fingers that even a one-tomo Sharingan could catch. Boar hide is extremely strong, so you need to be a bit close to it. The sniper got off his knee, and his blue eyes sparked as he remembered a vital piece of information. Oh, and the kickback is pretty strong, so brace yourself before and after each shot. Seeing as he made use of pressure and heat, and the firing rate was magnificently quick, then if he hadn't warned the boy, then the child would have surely been thrown off his feet after just one shot, probably with a dislocated shoulder. The older Uchiha scratched his chin. Should he have given the boy this sort of weapon? He shrugged airily. You'll be fine. Clench your fist to fire, relax your fist a little and then tighten your grip again to continue firing. Simple. Point, clench and brace yourself. Got it. His nephew nodded resolutely. Orochimaru had tried firing the forearm launchers once, the right one, and it was because of her reaction that time that Blue remembered to warn the smaller Uchiha about the recoil. Naruto had apologized for her bruised ego by buying having brunch with her. Blue wanted to pretend that it was a simple device, but it really wasn't. If it was, then Minato's inventors would have made their own version of it long ago. They were presently in knee-length grass and 2 feet before them was chin-length grass, spotted with a few stumpy trees. It had rained the other night so the grass was speckled with tiny droplets of water and the soil was wet, not so difficult to tread though. The Sannin watched her son place a headset over Itachi's head, test it and then send him out into the high grass to find them wild boar. The man's Sharingan didn't flared on. He tracked the boy's movement by the distinct sway of the grass, staring at the boy treading through the wet ground and searching for their target, until Itachi's own lesser powerful Sharingan spotted a small group of wild boar feasting on what looked like a rabbit. These boars had thick, grayish fur and beady yellow eyes, pink snouts that snorted heavily and powerful jaws that snapped at the bones of the unfortunate rabbit. Orochimaru fascinatedly kept staring at Blue as he reached over his shoulder and pulled out crystalline from his backpack. He held the long-range weapon up and positioned it on his right shoulder, peering into the scope and zeroing in on Itachi as the boy waited outside of the hearing range of the boars, bent down in a crouch and with his childish face devoid of emotion. It was no easy feat holding the weapon up in a firing position while standing. With all the gears and items packed in, as well as its sleek metal and plastic body, it weighed almost as much as an average man. Over time, it was a little bit lighter than when he was a child, though he didn't mind the weight and recoil of his launches too much because he used it as strength, stamina and endurance training. The recoil was capable of fracturing bones and yet the design was adaptable to the environment, whether Blue was firing from a desert or in a swamp. The blue-eyed Uchiha had trained and developed his skills since he was a child. Orochimaru couldn't be any prouder. You've been awfully quiet, Orochi. The man murmured. His mind ran through a quick set of numbers. The wind speed, length of his needle, the weighted seals already activated on his senbon, the distance and positions of each boar as well as the grass his needle would have to rip through before it could successfully tag its targets. The distance wasn't so far that he needed his dojutsu. Pulling back on the trigger twice and lodging the blasted needles into the sides of 2 wild boars, scattering the rest in a mad dash for self-preservation. For the 2 animals, the feeling was akin to being rammed in the side by one of their own. It packed an incredible punch in a single area, and the shockwaves of the weighted needle smashing into their sides jostled their muscles, allowing the needle to shoot inside and impale just under their hearts. Naruto's clear green needles were custom-made, thick enough to deal actual damage instead of bruising the skin, streamlined so as not to whistle once shot with the added feature of a weighted seal. Naruto applied himself to all his senbon before he went on a mission. There were a few of his needles that were hollow, space inside for an assortment of poisons, toxins and tranquilizers, and him using those hollow needles depended on the sort of mission he was on, requiring a whole other dimension of calculation so as to account for the added weight of the liquid materials inside each needle, or if he ran out of his normal needles and was in a desperate situation. He refocused his eyes on his nephew, having to activate his blue Sharingan to see clearly through the foliage. Itachi bolted in and his Tanto swiped down for the final kill, putting them out of their misery with a clean slice through their necks. The sniper hummed and slowly brought down his long-range launcher, keeping it at his side with the practiced ease of a trained marksman. There was hardly any sound after the 2 needles were sent flying out of the tip of the launcher and the man barely flinched from the recoil. The only sign of him using his launchers was the heavy billow of wind around him and the flutter of his shirt. He exhaled with a smile when Itachi grabbed each boar by their tails and starting dragging them back, through the tall grass and the wet soil. He was struggling and rightfully so, though the man allowed the boy the chance to figure it out by himself. He didn't even warn Itachi of the foxes sneaking to him from his right and left sides. Anything on your mind? The snake sage tapped her cheek, facing her son with a furrowed brow. I'm wondering what you're up to. What do you mean? He grunted and hefted his long-range launcher back into firing position and brought down 3 foxes with 3 squeezes of the trigger, before the small red-orange animals could ambush the already occupied boy from behind. Itachi had released the tails of his 2 kills and was busily fending off the foxes, using both his uncle's launchers and his tanto to fight. It was tough because the foxes were using the grass to hide. Blue casually popped out the empty Senbon cartridge from his weapon and replaced it with another one, tossing the empty cartridge in his backpack to be reused for later. He didn't seem to be in any rush to aid his nephew. The boy looked to have everything under control. Orochimaru coughed into her fist. I mean, what are you going to do when you get back to Konoha? Well, he pointed crystalline into the tall grass again but stayed his trigger finger when Itachi swiped at the fox he was targeting. One that bound him into the air with the intent on sinking its teeth in the boy's shoulder, cleaving it in half with the dangerously sharp blade, at the same time whirring around and pointing his fist at another fox, clenching and using the hard recoil to bash his elbow into one more fox that was squealing in his direction, crunching the poor animal's nose and impaling the first through its right eye. The man hummed, impressed at how his prodigy nephew used the momentum of the kickback from his forearm launcher as an attack. His dojutsu spun sluggishly in his sockets as he replied to his mother's question. When I get back, I'm going to grill one of those boars. Don't worry, I'll send you some. The woman wasn't impressed by his answer, but she was interested in the thought of her son's cooking. I'm not joking. I don't know how, but that Yondaime found a way to convince your friends, she air quoted sarcastically. That you are unstable. To be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do. He admitted with a heavy sigh. Minato managed to convince them that I was shakily insane. Who knows what else he managed to compel them to believe about me. Orochimaru shook her head and a dark frown crossed over her face. And all to get his hands on crystalline. That and my eye, an accountant says that Minato is trying to buy into a solar energy developing company based in Sunagakur that's showing promise, a company I own a 75% majority of. The Uchiha billionaire explained. The scientist silently listened, enthralled that her child, her flesh and blood, was so influential and yet so young. The others that own smaller parts of the company don't want to sell, cause clean, solar energy is revolutionary and they want the names to be written in history. Minato wants to buy the whole joint cause and even I see it the place is going to be raking in the millions in a few years. More money at once than any other company on our side of the continent. How does he get the solar energy developing company if he keeps making it that you're crazy? Didn't you say that no one knows you're rich? There are only 9 people on the continent that have enough net value to be referred to as billionaires, and 8 of whom are popularly known. The snake lady bobbed her head as understanding slowly came to her. Minato and maybe Kushina are probably the only outsiders that know I'm pretty wealthy, and seeing as my 75% investment is a silent partnership with Suna's solar energy company, Minato could continue calling me crazy, prove that I'm crazy, reveal my identity to that company and they, not wanting anything to do with me, would give me back all my money and send me away, allowing Minato room to spread his money into the company. Orochi scoffed. That weasel. Rightfully so. Naruto's eye, an accountant, had scouted out the Suna Solar Energy Company early, so early that 1% of the company, at that time, cost a measly 10,000 Ru. They needed the money to conduct surveys and research, and not many people saw the value of solar energy. The retired samurai turned accountant convinced the founder of the company to cede 75% of his company to his client Naruto and that his client still Naruto was a mere silent partner in everything they were going to do. He left any decisions in the founder's hands. Naruto's role was to keep most of the money flowing and in return he would get all of his investment back plus a 75% interest on that investment. Their ultimate plan was to begin developing and selling solar seals and solar panels across the continent by next year at a reasonable, affordable price, irrespective of the wealth status of their buyers. The company was rising to popularity, so much so that the Yondaime Kazekage, Sabaku no Rasa, had taken personal interest in them. Presently, as other affluent people noticed them, 1% of the company equaled 1,000,000 Ru. Minato was one of those that didn't want anything to do with Suna Solar Energy, at first, but he saw the profit later on. The other investors held on to their investments with tight fists, unrelenting and unwilling to sell. Essentially, it was too late to invest in Suna Solar Energy, but the Yondaime Hokage was a man that was in constant search of how to multiply his billions. Minato wore his wealth on his sleeve. Blue was more reserved in his affluence. The Uchiha shrugged and threw a larger-than-life grin to his mother. You're right though that he wants the schematics to crystalline. He rolled his eyes. He wants to put this weapon in the hands of every leaf shinobi. TCH. If that was to happen today, then I assure you, I'll get my hands on a crystalline by mid-morning tomorrow. Not by too dubious means either. Orochimaru could name, from the top of her head, members of the council and top Konoha inventors that would be more than willing to sell to her the plans to Blue's crystalline. The Hidden Leaf's corruption ran deep. Far too deep. Minato could very well know of the in-depth corruption and fraudulent activities of some of his counselors, namely the council elders, but it would then seem that he was turning his eyes away from it. That or the Yondaime thought he was the one reeling them in or restraining them, but the truth was that Konoha wasn't innocent. The Uchiha sniper might have loved his village, but they were the very last people he would ever entrust with crystalline schematics. I also want to prepare Itachi for the road ahead, in case something was to happen to me. The man's mother pinched the bridge of her nose and breathed out tightly. Don't talk like that, Naruto. I'm serious. The man said. He moved to her and placed his hands on her shoulders, tilting his head down so as to catch Orochimaru's golden yellow eyes with his cerulean orbs. I've got a bad feeling in my gut. Something is going to happen to me and I want Itachi to be in a good place, combat-wise, before whatever happens, happens. If it's death, then that's how it is. He had a trust fund opened for his nephew just the other day, a few moments after he arrived in Zuki to meet his mother. He relayed this message to his iron accountant through a contact in the Zuki branch of Hot Water Bank. He didn't open this trust fund in Fire Country because it was likely Minato would find out and exploit it somehow. Blue was also giving the boy space to develop his own ninja way, whether he chose to follow in his uncle's footsteps and become sniper or the boy would follow through on his fixation on genjutsus and become a genjutsu master. Orochimaru's face scrunched up as she peered upwards at her son's face, not amused by the tickled smile playing on his lips and the twinkle in his sky-blue eyes. I don't like all this talk of something bad happening to you, Naruto. Nothing is going to happen to you, not on my watch. She wasn't going to argue with him on her place in his future plans. She wasn't in need of money, her infamy warded people away and she had a few allies that preferred to be with her rather than against her. She was in a good place in her life, even though she was a missing ninja, and she was also very pleased with the prosperous life her child lived, but she wasn't happy hearing him speak about his demise so casually. She softly placed her hands on the sides of his face and her golden yellow eyes churned with emotion, a thick mixture of sadness, admiration and an overwhelming amount of love. I won't let anything happen to you, Naruto. The man smiled warmly and pulled her in for a hug, placing a small kiss on the top of her head. I love you too, Orochi. She curled up into his embrace, feeling smaller than she really was while in his arms, and she basked in the radiating warmth ebbing from his soul. The woman knew she was being too protective of him. Naruto was a Tokubutsu Junin with the Mangekyo Sharingan, a master of long-range combat and a very formidable person in close quarters. If there was anyone she shouldn't worry about, it was Blue. The man had proven, time and time again, that he was a capable and respected shinobi in Konoha and among Konoha's allies. The thing was, as a mother, she didn't want to think about her child dying. Orochimaru loved her son. She loved her son more than anything in the world. Reconnecting with him all those years ago had opened a floodgate of emotions she never knew she would experience. She had been afraid of those feelings, fearing that she was getting soft and that her child was making her lose herself, yet those same emotions were some of the best things she had ever felt. She didn't quite approve of the way Blue's father raised him. A hard-faced Mikoto pinned Naruto down by his arms and the boy bared his teeth up at her, defiant. Their father stood over them, his arms crossed and his face devoid. His coal-black eyes reflected his daughter and his son battling with the differing Sharingan, one a black and the other blue, both were two Tomo. Blue's place under Mikoto made it all the more difficult to fend off her illusionary attacks. Where are your launchers now, Blue? Mikoto snarled, gritting her teeth and forcing her eyes to spin with blazing speed, pushing her well onto her younger brother's equally churning blue orbs, yelling angrily. Where are they now? Blue spat up at her. Mikoto cracked her fist into his face. Their father didn't stop her from continuing her physical onslaught on his face, bashing in the 6-year-old boy's face. Orochimaru detested his upbringing, and yet somehow Blue hadn't grown up to be a hateful, resentful person. Somehow. Talking to him and getting to know him, despite the war rampaging through the world back then, made her happy. Truly happy. In all her life, she never knew she could ever really feel love for anyone other than herself. She didn't know that she was capable of worrying about the well-being of another human being, for she didn't worry about her human experiments like she worried about Blue, and even then it was a much more different kind of worry. It was an incomparable worry. An unparalleled love. The love of a mother for her child. Itachi's spare Senbon cartridges ran out and he turned to using genjutsus to fend off the foxes. Meanwhile, Orochimaru, nestled in Naruto's arms, reflected on how a detestable person like her could have ever lucked out in having a kind son like Blue. She was 17 and Tsukumo Hatake was hosting a party in a hall close to the Hokage's tower to celebrate the end of the Second Great Shinobi War. Orochimaru had not wanted to come but, against her better judgment, she had allowed Tsunade to drag her there, dressed in a casual black knee-length dress, dark grey tights and no weapons on her person except for a single kunai stashed in each sole of her white sneakers. Tsunade had complained and lamented on how the pale-skinned snake sage did not have any party clothes and she almost opted to lend her a few of her own clothes, though she didn't when she remembered that Orochimaru was as endowed as her. Orochimaru was very self-conscious of her small cup size. Jiraiya had once made fun of her cup breasts and she had promptly pumped his body with toxins that set his nerve endings on fire. Needless to say, anyone else that had a problem with her boobs wisely kept it to themselves. The party, supposedly a gathering of close friends, turned into a rave and the uncomfortable Sanin wedged herself in a table in the corner of the room, nursing a saucer and jug of sake and trying not to think of how the men and women avoided her table, not even wanting to spare 2 words with her for fear of their lives. She sniffed and turned her chin upwards. Who needs them? She though scathingly, downing another saucer of sake and wincing as the hot liquid ran down her throat. I'm having more fun here by myself. She leaned onto the table with her elbows and her golden yellow eyes turned to the dance floor, staring at Jiraiya making a fool of himself in front of a nameless Hyuga woman. Tsunade, shit-faced from who knows how many gallons of sake, tumbled into a belly laugh at a visibly awkward joke from Dan. The 17-year-old goth sniffed again and went back to her sake. Naruto's father was at the party, downing drink after drink and displaying exactly why alcohol brought out the most idiotic of everyone. He was 10 years older than her and already had a 4-year-old daughter with another Uchiha woman, his wife, who had run away from the village during the war, for reasons best known to them. Hamato Uchiha spotted her lingering gaze and smirked widely at her, his Uchiha pride blazing as bright as the sun that he had attracted the attention of a Sannin, the weird Sannin but a Sannin nonetheless. Orochimaru looked away with a frown, shifting with discomfort that he had caught her looking at him. He was passably good-looking and he looked fit, nothing special, in her opinion. The alcohol buzzed in her head and the heavy thump of the music resonated through her body, dizzying her and throwing her senses in disarray. The sake had been imported from grass country, the strongest on the continent. The 17-year-old genius probably should have checked the alcoholic content beforehand. He staggered in her direction and she took that as her cue to leave the table, exiting the hall for some fresh air. Hamato followed her out and Orochimaru didn't seem too pleased that he had. The alcohol most likely dulled his danger senses and prevented him from seeing how out of place the young scientist felt at that very moment. Hamato slurred a few messy pickup lines, capitalizing on his inebriated state. He pushed how close he could get to her, wedging her between his body and the wall. The woman's awareness was too dull to take much notice. It wasn't Orochimaru's first kiss. That experimental honor had gone to a faceless Konoha genin when they were 13. The boy was long dead and she didn't feel inclined or encouraged to kiss anyone again. Her first kiss was to see if she would like it. She didn't. It didn't have the explosion of stars behind her eyes and her heart didn't feel any particular connection with that genin. The kiss she shared with Hamato in the shade and alley next to the hall wasn't special either. It was wet and messy. Though, it was her first time having sex. In her delirium, she had managed to convince him to not take her then and there, out in the open, in the alley and under the pale mood. He carried her in his arms and Orochimaru had guided him to Tsunade's apartment, as she wasn't so eager to show him where she lived. It was rough. He might have been far drunker than her but he made sure to leave a lasting impression on her, bringing her to the edge and pushing her over. It was ironic that a young woman of her stature and scientific repute didn't have any condoms at hand, as she never anticipated that she would ever use them, and Hamato had forgotten his wallet in the dance hall, though he didn't want to waste the time heading back to get it while he could be nailing a Sannin. He left before sunrise, much to her dual relief and consternation. She wanted to swear him to secrecy and to see if he was up for a repeat sometime in the future. When she next saw Hamato Uchiha, he pretended not to know her, and she hated him for it. Hamato didn't say it, but Orochimaru knew that he really wanted it to have been Tsunade he spent the night with. Orochimaru didn't know she was pregnant for his child until 3 weeks later, when she began showing signs, which was another ironic thing for her. She could have sworn she had her tubes tied. Her first instinct was to chug down a phial of poison to flush out the creature growing in her stomach, rid herself of the bothersome morning sickness, swollen ankles and random dizziness. Hidden away in her laboratory in the forest of death, she already had the mixture ready at hand, a butt next to the bed in case it rose back her throat and easy access to a bathroom to pass out whatever came from her body, but she stayed her hand when she decided against it. To spite Hamato, was her reason. Orochimaru didn't know that deep down, of all the lives she had ended, young and old, the one growing in her abdomen was one she didn't want to so frivolously throw away. Another part of her mind swayed her into thinking that she wanted to bear the child so that he or she could inherit her work one day. She kept up appearances, wearing baggy clothing to hide the fact that she was with child, shrouding her middle in a cosmetic genjutsu. She also abstained from alcohol and any kind of heavy medication that Konoha's pharmacy didn't recommend for expectant mothers, and purposely keeping away from perilous missions that demanded a particularly high amount of dexterity, though what she couldn't hide was a drastic increase in her snappy, irritable behavior. Gradually, she receded into the sanctity of her laboratory, easing herself away from her former teammates and those that would notice her absence, until she finally pulled the Sannin card on the Hokage and told him she won't be taking missions for a while, not until she felt like it, and the Sandaime caved. Orochimaru occupied herself in the lab by digging deeper into her experiments, sending correspondence to Danzo to leave living test subjects, commonly humans, close by, and she would in turn pay him for his services. She had to make a blood clone, one that didn't have a child growing inside itself, to perform most of her lab duties when her body became too heavy to carry. She wasn't going to lie. Surrounded by dangerous chemicals and volatile test subjects, the Sannin was under constant temptation to terminate her pregnancy. She didn't. People saw her less and less, and even then it was her blood clone they met with, an unenthusiastic version of herself, tired from having to take care of its creator on a daily basis, as was its primary function. Back in the lab, the genius scientist spent her time talking to the life growing in her belly, telling it adventures she had had with her teammates and by herself, of how her goal in life was to attain perfect immortality and to also learn all the jutsus on and off the world, every jutsu imaginable. She didn't know how to sing, as her voice came out as an unpleasant, foul hiss after more than a few tries at common lullabies, but she did sit near a radio and listen to broadcasts coming from parts of fire country, snow country and waterfall. She still didn't have the patience for radio plays and talk shows, so she tuned off as soon as the singing stopped. A handful of months in, the Sannin found out the gender of her child. The blood clone worked double time in buying clothes and toys for the boy child she was about to give birth to, doing so secretly and without attracting anyone's attention. Orochimaru connected deeply with the child and she relished in the warm glow she was exuding. The 7th month of her seclusion ran by and Orochimaru went into early labor. Orochimaru's heart broke. She had given birth to a stillborn. The feeling was akin to losing her very soul. Itachi stalked out of the tall grass, covered in fox blood and panting up a storm, heaving the 2 dead boars behind him by their tails. Blue moved to the right and slung only an arm over his mother's shoulders, doing so bit with no trouble, as he was some inches taller than the reputably tall Sannin, stuffing his other hand into his pocket. The black-haired snake lady almost instinctively mirrored his motion, prevented herself from putting her hands into her pockets in favor of crossing her arms loosely, facing the younger Uchiha with a sly smirk and a pleased shine in her eyes at the sheer carnage of Itachi had left in his wake. The Uchiha sniper smiled brightly, noticing that his tanto was chipped but nonetheless jammed into the back of one of the boars. Well done. He retrieved his arm from over his mother's shoulder, something the Sannin visibly dimmed over with a displeased frown, and he walked to his nephew. Want to take a bath first, or you want me to show you how to skin it? The boy, heaving for air and releasing the animal's tails, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist and used the end of his shirt to clean the blood from his face, smearing it dirtily, but the boy was far from caring how clean he looked. Skin it first. Bath later. The man's smile lifted at his reply and he tousled the child's hair, enjoying the proud shine from the boy as Itachi puffed out his chest. All right, let's do that. 1 mile from Konoha. 5:32 p.m. As soon as the Hidden Leaf's eastern gate was visible, Blue and Itachi were surrounded by no less than 20 Anbu operatives. The blue-eyed Uchiha looked from left to right, doing so slowly, meeting Dog's hard eyes through the eyeholes of his mask. The black blonde-haired man breathed out in exasperation. I know how this goes. He bent down on one knee and Itachi got down from his back and he replaced the boy's position with his backpack, swiftly pushing it around his front to his back. He rose back up to his feet and shot the smaller Uchiha a quick look. Go on. Blue. The man's right eyebrow twitched. Uncle Blue. Uncle Blue. Anbu operative Cat came forward and grabbed Itachi by his shoulder, pulling him back. The deputy captain kept her eyes on her friend, sparing her left hand and subtly signing to him. We will talk, Blue. He didn't respond, flicking his cerulean eyes back to Dog. Weapons. The Anbu captain demanded, holding his hand out for Naruto's backpack. Naruto scoffed, rolling his eyes. You know I won't do that, right? Dog closed his hand and retracted it. It flopped to his side. Read the mood, Naruto. Itachi's eyes moved around the gathering of high-ranked shinobi, to the Tokubutsu Junin they had surrounded, and then he said, Uncle. Naruto beamed widely at him, his eyes closed and the corners turned up genially. It's going to be okay, kid. His warm expression cleared when as he turned back to Dog, who took out a tri-pronged kunai from the pouch on his right hip. Do we have to do this in front of him? The wind changed and a yellow flash blinked from the Harashan kunai. Minato stepped forward, his white with red flamed haori billowing in the low wind, his radiant yellow hair shifted and his crystal blue eyes shone mysteriously as he said. Itachi needs to be here. He has to know that disobeying the Hokage's orders has consequences. Really now? Blue lifted an eyebrow and pushed his right hand into his pocket, coolly scratching his cheek with the other as his eyes strayed to a single wandering leaf that blew into the Anbu circle he and Minato were standing inside. Mob justice. The Yondaime chuckled deeply. We are not so barbaric, Naruto. No. You, probably. The Uchiha said honestly, facing his bright yellow eyes to the Hokage, maintaining an even countenance and a generally unintimidated air was about him, even as the heckles of a few black operatives were raised at his apparent remark. Ha ha. Minato laughed, tossing his head back and flagging his irritated shinobi to calm down. That's why I like you, Naruto, you're not afraid. Dare I say, you're not scared of anything. Blue shrugged airily, tilting his head to the side fractionally and raptly keeping track of the Hokage with his unactivated blue eyes, especially when the man walked closer, about 2.5 feet away, and said in an even voice. You're also a lucky man, Naruto. A few more seconds and I would have branded you a missing ninja. Lucky me. Minato came a little bit closer and lowered his voice, so that only the Uchiha sniper could hear. You think there won't be any repercussions for you making a fool of me? He snapped under his breath, his formerly bright blue eyes darkened and Naruto's own blue orb swelled as he raised an inquisitive eyebrow. There are consequences to your actions, Naruto. His left hand motioned to his side, to Itachi, being held back by Cat's firm hands on his shoulders. You even got him involved in this mess. Shame on you, Naruto. Itachi's eyes narrowed and he clenched his teeth, holding back from snapping at the person restraining him by a quick flick of his uncle's eyes at him, telling him to relax. Minato crossed his arms and said in a louder voice. Where did you go? Wild boar hunting in grass country. It helps clear my head. I'm not an idiot, Naruto. We both know that's not all you did. Who did you meet? No one that should concern you. Is that so? The yellow flash hummed. Some hours ago, a team I stationed in Zuki Town went dark. You just so happened to be going in that direction. By any chance, do you know what happened to them? Blue's shoulders lifted carelessly. They could have gotten into trouble with any of the 3 Yakuza in that town. You knew the risks of sending them to that town. His forehead creased and it almost looked like he was curious as he asked. Didn't you, Minato? The man glared at the Uchiha and Naruto savored in the festering anger the Yondaime struggled to push back down his gut. It seems, you don't know anything of their whereabouts. He coughed into his fist, tightly, and then said, I acknowledge that I have been too lenient with you, I will not be so forgiving now. Your insubordination will be remedied soon enough, but unfortunately my wife won't be too pleased if I throw you into prison. He enjoyed the frown that crossed onto Blue's face as soon as he mentioned Kushina, his wife. So, from this moment onwards, your traveling rights are revoked and you are hereby placed on indefinite suspension from the Konoha Ninja Force. You will not be allowed to go on any kind of mission or be given any function that in any way relates to being a shinobi. As of this moment, until I say so, you are a civilian. Blue's face remained perfectly emotionless. You are not allowed to use any of your launches within Konoha's borders without my say-so. The man said, a smirk grew on his face and his eyes glowed pleasantly. Say goodbye to your ninja way, Naruto. Dog's posture didn't change, not outwardly. Cat winced and her masked face lowered. It was like a punch to the gut. Blue loved what he did for a living, it made him feel like he didn't fit the fold. Different. He didn't care much that it seemed selfish of him to not share with his home village schematics to Crystalline, but that wasn't the point. Sniping was an art form he had created and perfected over the span of 16 years, since he first put pencil to paper and began planning his future weapon. He had been through more than his own fair share of trails to reach the stage of mastery he was presently on, and he appreciated each problem for they helped form who he was as a person and aided in directing his path for his ninja way. Another thing the Yondaime had done was imposing his will on Blue, something the Uchiha hated with a burning passion, something that his friends and acquaintances knew better than to do. Minato knew what he was doing. He wanted to get a rise out of him. He wanted Blue to strike him, lash out. Provoke the spectating Anbu into reacting. Brand him as a criminal and have all his property seized. The Namikaze's eyes darkened once more and he tittered under his breath. Inside his pockets, Naruto's fists cracked savagely, and yet his face stayed impassive. I know what you're doing. Blue grated, steadily bringing his right hand out of his pocket so as not to alarm the Leaf's black operatives. He rolled his wrist and his hatate appeared in his palm in a short burst of smoke. He looked down at the forehead protector, his plain expression not giving away the turmoil roiling in his heart and the heat rising up his throat that he so direly wanted to pour out on the Hokage. I won't let you win. You're a smart man, Naruto. He collected the hatate but the older Uchiha didn't release his hold, rather pulling the Yondaime closer with a quick jerk and leaning in so that his lips were near the blonde Kage's left ear. Naruto whispered between his grit teeth. Don't forget this, Namikaze. Minato drew back and yanked Naruto's forehead protector out of the other man's grip, saying with a derisive hum. Not smart enough, I guess. Naruto's hair cast a heavy shadow over his upper face and his lips turned downwards into an invisible frown. He returned his hands to his pockets. Minato looked at Itachi and nodded to Blue, saying, take a good look at him, kid. This is what happens when you are defiant to the Hokage's orders. Failure. He faced Naruto again, the level-hated Uchiha glared darkly from the darkness under his hair. He is a failure. Out of the two men inside the Anbu circle, Itachi had lost respect for one of them. And it wasn't for his Uncle Blue. It's a good thing you're going for therapy. The Yondaime suddenly said, words that made Blue's eyes bug out with shock. But I have to agree with your sister, admitting yourself into a psych ward will be the best choice for you. Sort out that mad jumble of instability in your head. He chuckled amiably, savoring how Naruto hadn't come down from his surprise at him knowing about his therapy sessions. Only two people knew, his therapist and his sister. The former a respectable, reliable and reputable therapist in Konoha was bound by a moral code, an ethical code and a personal code of silence, to never divulge the proceedings of their meetings to any other soul aside from his patient, Naruto. Doctor-patient confidentiality, if you will. In Fire Country, it was a medical code that could only be broken after the death of the patient. Naruto couldn't say the same about other countries, but it was universally accepted that the privacy of the patient, any patient, was to be deeply respected. Anything on the patient was sealed by blood. That only left his sister, Mikoto. Be thankful Kushina has a soft spot for you. I personally would have left you in Ibiki Morino's more than capable hands. He jabbed a finger on Blue's chest, and the other man held steady, his blue orb spinning with suppressed rage. I don't see why she's fond of you, but she is. Make sure you thank her properly at the get-together, okay? He shoved Blue back a step and turned around with a swish of his cloak, disappearing in a yellow flash. One by one, the Anbu leaped off into the tree line and pelted to Konoha, until dog and cat remained, standing behind Itachi. Blue, I'll talk to you later, kid, he interrupted his nephew, turning away from the boy with his back hunched a little and his pocketed hands closed into rigid fists. Because he knew that Mikoto and Fugaku would scrap their wedding anniversary and rush back to the village, the blue-eyed shinobi said in a low voice. Tell you mom I said, hi. The deputy captain's hands tensed on Itachi's shoulders, not sure if she should speak, now of all times. Dog patted Cat's upper arm and the woman swept Itachi up into her arms. Both ninjas jumped into the trees, leaving Blue alone. The next day, 8:10 p.m. The Whirlpool Mansion. Western Residential District. Konohagakure no Sato. By the end of the Third War, many shinobi of the Leaf realized that they had seen their full of the front lines and either filed for retirement or to be placed on passive duty, to work as academy teachers or full-time gatekeepers. One of the people that outright stepped back from the front lines was Uzumaki Kushina, a former Junin Kunoichi and the holder of the nine-tailed fox. Her reason for this was simply that aside from being the Kyubi Jinchuriki, she didn't feel like she held any other obligation to the village her grandmother Mito supposedly loved. Despite being married to the Hokage and moving in with him into the Hokage's mansion, she ended up buying a mansion a short distance from the Nara compound on a clanless residential district. Kushina did this because she enjoyed having her own space far away from Minato. She felt stifled. Predictably, Minato didn't like this. Also predictably, Kushina did what she wanted. The former princess of Whirlpool did indeed live with her husband in the Hokage's mansion, as most of her things were there in that house, but she went to the Whirlpool mansion a handful of times to celebrate some holidays or to host small, friendly gatherings. Blue clambered over the wrought iron gate into the redhead billionaire's estate and the seals on the gate recognized his chakra, seeping back its reflexive defenses before it could lash out at the Uchiha man. He landed on the other side with a soft crunch of his bright red sneakers on the gravel road, ignoring how the gate creaked behind him, as if to open but keeping shut as it found out that he was already inside the compound. There was a light breeze coming in from the east, blowing a subtle chill into the village and making the color-coordinated flowers in the front garden of the estate dance merrily under the pale moon. The man hummed quietly and pushed his right hand into his pocket and his other hand held the handle of a large, blue food cooler. He proceeded forward, taking his time walking to the large house, where modest music and chattering voices reverberated from. His blue eyes flicked to his right, eyeing a statue in the garden, one of a downsized nine-tailed fox facing inwards to the path leading to the house. He looked at the identical Kyubi statue on the other side, and sniffed distractedly when he heard Chu Minazuka's chortle loudly. The blue Uchiha was in a short-sleeved black shirt with the Uchiha clan symbol stamped on the back and black shinobi pants that stopped above his ankles. His dark clothes complemented his bright red shoes, more so that he had a pair of red gloves of the same shade on his hands. He removed his right hand from his pocket and ran it through his shaggy black blonde hair, stepping up to the front door of the mansion. Naruto pressed the doorbell. Ding dong. He breathed out with a grumble as the noise inside the house ground to a stop. News spreads fast. He could have very well snuck into the house through the attic, a secret entrance Kushina had showed him when she bought the house the other year, but he refused to hide or hang his head in shame. His opinion of his friends had gone down ever since he found out that he was a class A threat, further giving him reason to care less of what they thought of him now that he was indefinitely suspended from the ninja force and relegated from being a Tokubutsu Junin to an average civilian. The man scratched his cheek with his pointer finger and waited for the door to be answered. A broadly grinning Kushina opened the door half a second later. Blue, sup. She opened her arms wide and brought him in for a warm hug. It's so good to see you. It's been so long. She held him out in her arms, mildly discouraged by the polite pat on her back, and puffed out her cheek stubbornly. Have you been avoiding me? Blue chuckled at her pouting face and felt a sweet drop run down the side of his face. Probably. She wasn't surprised by his honesty and she tapped his chin familiarly. You owe me dinner, mister. As your apology. The blazing redhead swept her eyes at him, down and back up again, shamelessly ogling him, and she smirked. You look good, Blue. The man took his time soaking in how his crush looked. The woman was dressed in a purple and white kimono that stopped at her knees, black tights underneath and low-heeled shinobi sandals on her feet. Her waist-length red hair flowed freely down her shoulders and her purple eyes shone radiantly, illuminating the world around her. Blue coughed into his fist and held up the cooler in his left hand, saying, "I made grilled boar hot pot." The woman's eyes lit up eagerly and she took the cooler with both of her hands. "I wasn't sure if I was supposed to bring anything, so I." She cracked open the cooler a little and inhaled the tantalizing, knee-weakening, drool-inducing smell of the Blue Uchiha's cooking. "I missed this, Blue. Your cooking, I mean." She smiled slightly and sealed the cover of the cooler back on again. "What happened to us? We used to be so close." Bringing his face down, dangerously close to hers, close enough for their noses to just barely touch, the corners of his lips tilted up in a slight smile as she tilted her head upwards to match his height and very nearly stood on her toes, her purple eyes dilated and her small lips trembled minutely, almost unseen. She blinked out of her hazy delirium when poked her forehead with his pointer and middle finger. "You got married." The woman's face turned red and steam billowed from her ears in embarrassment, even as he passed her and entered the hallway towards the main room of the house. Kushina slammed the door shut and ran after him, holding the cooler in her right hand and her left hand crashing into his unprotected left upper arm with a hard punch. Tough luck. She forced her heart to calm down at how close he had been and on the lingering scent of chicken ramen on his breath. Her face stretched into another grin, a rather stiff one, but one she was thankful he didn't see. "I'm happily married." The man rubbed his sore upper arm and rolled his eyes, not seeing but feeling the forced tone in that statement. "If you say so." Blue didn't hide how much he liked the Uzumaki woman from her. He made it very clear to his crush that he still harbored feelings for her whenever they met. Since his fateful confession all those years ago, to the few times they met on the battlefield and to the conclusion of the war, Kushina knew how much Naruto liked her, but over time he reduced contact with her. Blue distanced himself. She would sight him somewhere in town, but when she turned the same corner as him, he was gone, or if she stopped by the Uchiha clan compound to visit him, he purportedly wasn't at home. This had started after she showed him around her newly acquired mansion 1 year and 10 months ago, a whole month after the Third War ended. She was particularly proud of the house she had bought, amid the disapproval of her friends, and was more pleased to hear that her blue-eyed friend didn't have a problem with her having her own private quarters away from her then-fiancé's house. She was so happy to hear his support for her decision that she gave him a spare key to the house and keyed him to the security seals. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision on her part, but one she didn't regret. Next time she saw him was at her wedding, 5 or so months later. He had stayed for the ceremony and the reception and had given the couple presents. He had given Minato a brand new suit, which her husband threw away moments after the wedding, and Naruto had gifted her a roll of coupons for Ichiraku ramen, and she rewarded him with a larger-than-life smile, a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Since then to now, she hadn't seen him. Kushina felt selfish in thinking that she had a special connection with Blue. A deep connection, a link she didn't share with those in her inner circle. She wasn't quite 100% sure what the connection was exactly or how his absence in her day-to-day life created a hurting pang in her chest. She jumped when she saw him make to open the door at the end of the long hallway. "Ah, wait a minute." She hurried to him and stopped before him, blocking his path to the main room, where the other group of conversing friends were anxiously awaiting the entrance of the recently discharged Uchiha man. Kushina scratched the back of her head and tittered liltingly, suddenly unsure of herself at his curiously raised eyebrow. "Let's talk, we haven't talked in a while." He crossed his arms loosely and shrugged with a lopsided look, one between critical suspicion and vague interest. "Sure, what do you want to talk about?" Again, she felt selfish for wanting to monopolize his time. She knew that there was a chance that their friends would swarm him once he entered the main room and either bombard him with insults for defying the Hokage's orders or sympathize with him for losing his ninja way. There might not be a chance to talk to him again for that night, and she eagerly wanted to speak with him. Now, given the chance to do so, her tongue became dry and static rang through her head. An eyebrow slithered up his forehead at the way her purple eyes flitted to him and away from him, searching around for something to talk about as she gingerly dropped the food cooler onto the ground. She snapped her fingers as a topic came to mind. "I had a girls' night out some nights ago." The man stared at her, wondering how that was any of his concern. "Okay." Her face twisted with anger and her cheeks reddened with shame. "Anko said you broke her headboard, almost concussed her." Blue face palmed, mumbling with frustration. She swore she wouldn't tell anyone. "Well, Kushina perched her fists on her hips, her eyes narrowed and her lips turned down into a hard frown. It's what she was asking for. She said she wanted it rough and I gave it to her rough. He fixed her red face with a long look. Did you hear anything else? That you hooked up with Kurenai, yeah. Kushina huffed, suppressing her fiery breath into tight exhales from her nose, crossing her arms tightly and glaring up at him. And Shizune and some girl from Kumo and another girl from Suna and another one in Iwa. Blue lifted his hands up in surrender as her voice became louder with each word, angrier, standing on her toes and shoving him back, or at least trying to. I'm an active person, you can't blame me. And besides, why are you so mad? You've got Minato, don't you? She withdrew into herself at the reminder that she was married. She cleared her throat tersely and tried to calm down her inflamed cheeks. I'm not mad. I'm only concerned with your health. He looked at her skeptically, not convinced by her logic. My health. Yes. You could tire yourself out if you keep on going like that and what if you get someone pregnant? Huh. What happens then? In the first place, I don't go around humping anything that moves. The Uzumaki covered her mouth and sniggered into her hand, the sound tickled Blue to his very core. And anyway, whenever I do it, I'm very careful. I always keep a pack of condoms somewhere on me and if she wants it raw, then it's likely she's protected herself in some way. He pointed to his eyes and his blue orbs briefly flashed to its 3-tomo form, shifting back to normal a split second later. I know. Contraceptive seals were a common alternative. Naruto and Anko had been together many times. So many times that they had to outline, very clearly, that whatever they did that night or day would not affect their friendship. They weren't an exclusive thing, as Blue freely did what he wanted and Anko as well, but when they were stationed in the same post and were given a reprieve from the front line, they went at it like ravenous rabbits. One such occasion was in Anko's apartment 4 days ago, and it had resulted in him smashing the headboard with the top of her head. She didn't seem to notice much, not until much long after. Sleeping with Anko was always a tricky thing, as the woman enjoyed sex hard and fast, his hands around her throat or him pulling her hair back or him paddling her behind red. Kurenai was more passionate. The Genjutsu mistress enjoyed the gradual build-up when she slept with Naruto, and the Uchiha didn't mind the slow pace that much. Blue knew the right buttons to push and not only did he push them, but he pushed them into a rumbling earth-rocking climax, leaving her with much less energy than she began with and glowing as he kissed her down from her high. She and Naruto didn't often spend the night together, as she was now in a committed relationship with Asuma Sarutobi, but she treasured each night with him in her heart. Secretly, Kurenai hoped that he was still single if things with her and Asuma didn't work out. Shizune was petite woman, shy, insecure and unconfident. The slug Sanon's apprentice had approached Blue in Suna. He had been her first and, from what she told Kushina, he was her only. He took the lead and she shuddered back submissively, but Blue didn't take her hard like Anko or overly gently like Kurenai, but a mix that depended on how at ease with him Shizune was that day. The young medic wanted to be in a relationship with Blue, after their blisteringly hot night in Suna, but she didn't want to tie him down in Konoha while she traveled the continent with her mistress, Tsunade. The times she and Tsunade were in Fire Country, she would contact Naruto to see if he was available and he would arrive at where she was. For hours they would learn more about each other's bodies and the small rests in between. Shizune very much enjoyed hearing the man talk as they laid in bed. Especially his deep, rumbling laugh when she managed to say something even remotely funny. The women in the group could clearly see that the quiet medic was utterly infatuated with the blue Uchiha. There were a whole slew of other women Naruto had been with, whether they were from enemy villages or allied nations. Much like how Naruto had contacts and connections in Iwa and Kumo, he could also readily find women in those two notoriously leaf-hating villages that were willing to have sex with him for no charge. Those women were either apathetic of the war, disliked their village's position in the war, or appreciative of Blue for however he helped them. Though he had seen Yugao naked many times, too many times for it to count as decent, actually, it had never once entered the realm of sexual attraction. She was like a sister to him. Was. Despite that, Naruto was still single. You're a real player, Blue. Kushina said with a forlorn sigh. Minato was completely different. He had wanted him to save sex until after marriage, and for Kushina, it was endearing and considerate of him, but after getting married, she found out that Minato was a very formal man in bed. He wasn't as adventurous or as commanding as she heard Naruto was, and when the deal was done, twice or sometimes 3 times, he was too tired for them to just talk or at least cuddle. Not that he was doing anything wrong and not that he couldn't satisfy his wife, but she was getting bored with the same routine. She didn't like how she wasn't feeling the connection she had with Naruto with her own husband. She didn't feel like a priority to Minato, she felt like a necessity. Like a trophy. She didn't feel that it was selfish of her to think that her husband could spare at least 30 minutes of his time for an uninterrupted date. She understood that the job of the Hokage was a busy one, she really did, but every day she would see her husband less and less, give her time to think of everything she regret in their union. A little while with her thoughts made her realize that the only real thing she had in common with her childhood crush was their love for ramen. Even now, he was still in the office. Kushina had made many efforts to make their marriage work and in a way it was okay, as the Yondaime hadn't noticed his wife's inner turmoil, but with time the Uzumaki found less and less reason for her husband's obliviousness at her frame of mind. Blue might have been her best friend's younger brother but she often spoke with him about many profound things, the dreams and the dislikes. Those talks took place mostly when Mikoto wasn't present but they were some of the best times she had ever had in her life. Just talking to him. Blue distancing himself from her hurt. It hurt a lot. They knew what they were getting into. He shrugged, without a care in the world, yanking her back to reality. The redhead pouted and scuffed her heel on the ground. It's dangerous though. I can handle myself. She then smiled brightly and clasped her hands together, almost pleading, and her eyes widened innocently. Why don't you just stop having sex altogether, until you've found the right person? Naruto chuckled patronizingly. We both know that's not going to happen. She narrowed her eyes, suddenly mad again, and her hands reached forward, patting down his pockets and sliding around to pat his back pockets, knowing full well that shinobi pants didn't have back pockets. She snapped, rightly pushing down the urge to flush at the firmness of his behind and keeping her mind from thinking of what lay underneath. You've got condoms on you. He didn't move, not even when she had cope a feel of his butt, and blinked in surprise when she patted his chest, again knowing that he didn't have any shirt pockets. Yup. I want to blow off some steam. Breathing out hot air from her nose, she didn't move back for space as she held out her hand. Give them to me. He tapped her nose and a traitorous blush bloomed across her nose, onto her cheeks. No. Why not? Because, Kushina, I want to stop being hung up on you. Her heart tightened at his words and the honest glimmer in his eyes. He smiled gently and ghosted the back of his hand on her cheek. I want to get over you. She swallowed thickly and her hands grabbed onto the material of his black shirt around his stomach, clenching hard. Her red face lowered shyly and her eyes noticed that she was now too close to him, too close for it to be called friendly. He discarded her pride and her roundabout questions, and threw herself out there, hoping to be caught. Why? The heat of her face seeped through his glove and she pulled herself closer to him, close enough for her face to press into his chest. Why do you have to get over me? The Uchiha exhaled with his eyes closed, his shoulders sagging and his arms dropping to his sides, even as the shorter redhead's own hands held his shirt tighter. Kushina. Stay over tonight, she muttered from her place in his chest. We don't have to do anything, not if you don't want to. He opened his mouth to reject her offer but she interrupted him, seeking out his warmth and feeling the calm thud of his heart. I've had months to think about this, Naruto. Calling him by his name, instead of his nickname, she was being serious. She began to stutter. I know you don't like going F for married women and I respect that, honest. B but like I said, we don't have T to have S sex. Realization suddenly came to him and he grabbed her by her upper arms, holding her at arm's length and peering deep into her eyes. He asked this once. Did you know I was classified a class A threat? He saw genuine confusion overcome her face. A what? It was his turn to be confused. You didn't know. Not even a spark of guilt or a flash of dishonesty passed over purple orbs. Quite frankly, she was looked affronted. This is the first time in months since I've seen or heard about you, Naruto. Of course I don't know. What she didn't know for sure was what Kakashi told her, that Naruto had snubbed the Hokage's orders and fled the village with his nephew, Itachi, and that the Hokage feared that the legendary sniper would find a spot somewhere in the distance and begin picking him off. It was odd how Kakashi didn't say why Blue would turn on them. It was also strange how, despite knowing the blue Uchiha for years, the group of friends immediately assumed the worst in him. That morning, she rushed to the Hokage's office and pleaded with her husband to stay his hand, to not brand Blue as a missing ninja until they were absolutely, positively sure he had run away from the village. Proof that the man hadn't betrayed Konoha stood right before her in the form of the Uchiha man himself. So she was right, Blue would never do something like that, not without good reason. Right. Kushina peered up at the man she liked and her eyes dilated again, this time not with desire but a longing to return to his embrace, though she made do with him holding her upper arms in his hands as she told him what had happened in his absence, and how she begged for Minato to not think he was betraying Konoha. The Blue I know would never betray Konoha and worst still would never put his nephew's life in danger, not unless you were sure neither of you were going to be in danger. Naruto wondered, then and there, what else Minato had been telling Kushina about him and his mental state, as well as how strong of an impression he had left on the rambunctious redhead for her to not think otherwise of him. He had found another ally, he grasped with a start. The question now was why, of all the things Minato might have told her or the rumors she had definitely heard about him, was she not made aware of him being designated a class A threat? Was her faith in him so solid that she didn't allow doubt shake the very foundations of their friendship? As dramatic as it sounded, it was the best explanation the former shinobi's sharp brain could concoct, until he had the chance to discuss with Kushina again. Staying over didn't sound so bad. The door to the main room opened and Blue removed his hands from Kushina's upper arms, not wanting it to look like he was imposing himself on the red-haired hostess. Kureonai's red eyes sparked pleasantly as she spotted Blue. She waved. "Hi, Naru." He nodded back to her. "Hey, sorry about." "Don't worry about it." He cut her off, not wanting to hear her pity him for losing his job. The illusionist's crimson eyes drifted to the ruffled redhead as the woman faced her, rubbing her nose with her thumb to hide her previous red flush. "We're running out of food." Chooser and the other guys thought it was a good idea to have an eating contest. Ah. Well, perfect timing. She picked up the blue cooler of food Naruto had brought with him, suspecting that the storage space inside was much larger than it looked. Blue made some grilled boar hot pot. She bustled past the woman into the main room, again hiding the redness of her face and the wild thumping of her heart with her clenched fist, ready to bash in the skulls of any person that took part in the eating contest. She had prepared a whole feast and now it was gone. Hell stormed for the participants within the main room. "I'll go set it up." Surprised that Kushina was taking it so lightly, Kureonai opened the door wider for Naruto for him to enter. Once again, the conversations of the people in the main room reduced to muffled babble, glancing not so subtly at the newly arrived Uchiha man. Not for the first time that evening, the blue Uchiha sighed. "Let's get this night over with." That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.